Okay, good afternoon to everyone. We're about to begin our session this afternoon on youth in politics and anti-politics. And the members of the panel, Nicole Hendrickson, Nickson Barry, Jason Francis, and Amilcar Sanatan. Before I call up our presenters, I just want to recognize the youth ministers from CARICOM who are here. And we thank you for gracing us with your presence this afternoon. And we're looking forward to an in-depth discussion based on the presentations that we're going to have this evening. So the first presenter I'm going to call to the podium is Nicole Hendrickson, and she has been a sexual and reproductive health and rights educator for the past 15 years. She is the Trinidad Youth Council's first gender affairs officer, and she is a volunteer at the Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross. Please welcome her. She comes to make a presentation, Nicole Hendrickson.
Afternoon, everyone. So my paper is on the youth councils as a path to parliamentary representation. At the ILO's 2012 conference in Trinidad, there were 13 national youth councils represented in the region. I see them as agents for social change. They should be seen also as social movements. Youth councils should be seen as youth representatives of their country. Sounds familiar? This is how governments should be seen as representatives of the people. I propose in my presentation today to show how the youth councils can be seen as a part of parliamentary representation. Specifically, my presentation will focus on exploring the ways youth councils can be seen as a social movement, a structure from the Trinidad and Tobago perspective, a gender balance or a lack thereof for possible placement in the future, a short historical analysis of the Trinidad Youth Council, and 2 recommendations to be explored as forerunners to the youth councils. What are national social movements? In the book How Social Movements Matter, McCarthy and Zalad define social movements as a set of opinions and beliefs in a population which represents preferences for changing some elements of the social structure and or reward distribution of a society. Tilly, the term social movement applies most usefully to a sustained interaction between a specific set of authorities and various spokespersons for a given challenge to their authority. Movements that challenge national movements. These kinds of movements considered as an essential part of the democratic process, a product of the same forces that led to the development of electoral politics and more political organizations, which he calls created associations. The young people of our region are asking for a different type of representation. One option being proposed is the use of the bottom-up approach. This approach considers electing the next set of leaders for persons who have shown service to the country within their island's youth councils. Within this proposed structure, youth councils can be seen as being operational in an effective as an optimal development space for young persons to learn about community, representation, inter- and interpersonal skills, and of diplomatic conduct. Specifically, I'm proposing that those who want to serve their country at the highest level be allowed to do so within a specialized field of interest. For example, I know lots of persons who used to be involved in the youth movement now work in other fields because to them they saw no opportunity for advancement. In my parents' time, there was no position called a youth worker. Now at the tertiary level, there are all kinds of qualifications targeted at youth, gender, and sports that were not previously available. In fact, yesterday, we heard what went into the decision of having a youth degree at UWI. As well as we have also seen that there are greater opportunities for not only males but females in these areas, something that is not seen back in the day. There is also a great gender dynamic that also exists within our Caribbean context. Most of the key and important positions go to young men. How many of these young youth councils are headed by young women? What are we saying to young women and girls that the processes that are supposed to be training grounds wouldn't allow them to be part of the major decision-making positions that are visible. Would supporters be willing to contribute towards a female-headed youth council? Young women are willing to take up, are young women willing to take up the challenge of leading one of the major youth organizations in your country? Are you willing to challenge the patriarchal structures that would have gone before allowing women firstly inside the youth council and also to support their work? From the outside, other women should also be used in terms of guidance, in terms of the older women's organizations. Traditionally within the Caribbean, outside of the women's group and some church groups, most of them are led by men. Even though some of the international trends and the information show that this is so because of culture and tradition. We are accustomed to seeing definitely influences how we choose our governors. In the region, Dame Eugenia Charles was the first female prime minister who ruled from 1990 to 1999. This was a very new and brave move on behalf of the people of Dominica. Over the years in other parts of the world, we've had in 1966, Indira Gandhi, who ruled for 3 consecutive terms, and then a 4th in 1980, until she was assassinated in 1984. In 1979 to 1990, we had Margaret Thatcher, who headed Britain. And in Pakistan, we've had Benazir Bhutto from 1988 to 1990, and then again in 1993 to 1996, until she too was assassinated. Coming back home in the region, we've had Janet Jagan in Guyana, who was elected in 1997, but resigned in 1999 for health reasons. And within the last 2 decades, we've had Portia Simpson Miller from 2006 to 2007, then 2012 to now, and in Trinidad and Tobago, we've had Kamla Prasad Vasessa from 2010 to 2015. Before 1966, it was unheard of for a woman to head a country. All of these key examples of women in power continue to have implications for and to young people, and in particular, young females. The saying goes that some leaders are born and others have leadership thrust upon them. There are some women, due to difficult circumstances, are willing to take the bull by the horns and work towards their empowerment, to lead whilst others are willing to have others work in their corner to ensure that their representation goes to where they need to. The youth councils are no different. They are microcosms of society. It is very rare that they operate outside of their cultural and traditional norms. Some of the shifts also for young men, also to recognize that young women should take their place in positions of authority as well as governance by what is the prevailing thought about women in leadership. The opposite can be seen by what's happened with the assassination with Mrs. Bhutto in Pakistan. One section we need to pay particular attention to is the barriers to young people entering into politics. Last year in Trinidad and Tobago's report on the first IPU Global Conference in Geneva, Switzerland, of young parliamentarians, Professor Mona Crook, who teaches political science at Rutgers, with her specialty being in women in politics, indicated that women are often overlooked as candidates by their political parties as their political skills are underestimated. Here again, I look to women's participation in their youth council, their track record of what they have achieved or their performance that speak to it. We also have to look at positions that the young women fill. Do remember that almost all organizations fall prey to their environment's prevailing thoughts. How do we view women in politics, positions of power, and more so, are young men willing to give full support by working alongside young women in similar positions of power? Do the gender politics of our respective territories allow for simultaneous ownerships of power? It has been documented that generally women, and more so young women, face a double negative impact of their age and their sex as barriers to participation. Some of these barriers include, but are not limited to, the first being skills, motivation to participation, formal adult-led processes, lack of limited resources, awareness and knowledge at the individual level. Secondly, at the organizational level, hindrances to economic and other resources, limited knowledge and know-how. And the third being internal mechanisms, rules and procedures do not favor the inclusion of youth. And I'm sure that my colleague who's going to talk on barriers to women in politics will talk further on this. One of the earlier accounts of the Trinidad Youth Council dates back to the 1940s. The name Lennox here appears on almost all our documents. As a matter of interest, Lennox was also a steel pan man. And this is where I think the Trinidad model can be used of an example of the youth council being part of radical groups in society. In 1999, the Trinidad Youth Council was revamped after the government at the time was seeking funding for national projects and was told as part of the funding requirement that they had to have a national youth organization that would act on behalf of the young people nationally. It's also funny that the previous administration, just before the general election, in the form of the Ministry of Gender, Youth and Child Development, we started the process towards a national youth council. And talking about the fact that it seems as if our governments are not really interested in having our youth participate, but when they see it as youth being in their interest at that time, it's the only time they will involve youth in their processes. An internet search, as I said, revealed that Tobago governing policy around seal pan, that their representative at the time was Lennox Spear, a pan man. Himself was part of the Trinidad and Tobago Youth Council. Here's why I would say that very, very early the Trinidad Youth Council has had representation from persons who belong to radical organizations like pan men and union men and the like. And therefore there's a perception that these affiliations may taint how others see the organization. However, please remember that I said that it should be seen as part of the social movement of a country, which of course has its positive and its negative elements. You would also, in terms of the Trinidad model, how you belong to the Trinidad Youth Council is that you have to be working in your own silo, whatever your field was. My field was in sexual reproductive health and rights. It also meant that I had to belong to my district youth council, so I moved to that level. And after moving to that level, I was then asked to be on the national executive. My first position was trustee. I left as the first gender affairs officer. There's hope over the years that young people will be able to represent their peers to work towards their betterment. It could be used as a learning platform for wider exposure if they continue on this trajectory. It could lead also to a straight line in becoming a parliamentary representative with the required academic background. To conclude, I would also like to put forward 2 recommendations as forerunners to youth councils. Based on an internet research, I saw that we have no children's parliaments in the region. Consequently, these youth parliaments only exist in Africa and Asia. What is interesting also too is that when I did the research, what came up was a model in Guyana. But when I read the article, they said only secondary students. Of course, in terms of how we sometimes student children, I didn't use it as part of my study. It would also take for us to, what would it take for us to work with children under 12 to debate in a parliament type space on an issue that they choose? What are your thoughts on children that age guiding their own democracy? We all know the prevailing thoughts on children. They all need to be told what to do. I believe that children are only different to adults in specific ways. They lack experience and they lack knowledge, but they have experiences just like us, and if allowed to, they can discuss what challenges them, and we'd be surprised by what we find. Secondly, how do we see student councils? Can we see this also as a way of having student-age persons being able to chart their own democratic process? Yesterday it was asked, how do we see young people being able to chart their democratic life when for the majority of their first 18 years, they are told what to do? We in the region may be behind in how and when we give young people their voice. I would admit that when they decide to represent, they do it well, and they make us proud. I think in terms of everything we've seen in the last couple of days, we can attest to when young people are given the space and the resources, they perform well. But we need to be the encouragement of the representation at an early age. I would say to get the representation we all want and need, we need to start thinking about what exists now and how we can shift what we see in our democratic processes, and how do we seek to include children and young people in these processes.
Thank you, Nicole Hendrickson. Our next panelist is Mr. Jason Francis, and he's the past president of the Barbados Youth Development Council and former interim chairman of the Caribbean Regional Youth Council. His interests include youth development, human rights, gender, ICTs for development, NGO management, and non-formal education. Please welcome Jason as he comes.
Good afternoon again to everyone. I'm just going to share a little about the background to this paper before I actually get into the presentation. This is the actual paper, and on it is the cover of, I guess you can say, Barbados' leading newspaper, the October 17, 2010 edition, and it says, "Mia out. The LP group of 5 may be headed to the Governor General. Political candidates weigh in on the LP developments." And this was a historic moment in the country, and also for myself and the Youth Council at the time, because this was actually the last meeting where Ms. May Marley, who was the leader of the opposition at the time, she actually spoke at our Youth Council general meeting, and she said, "I do not know this might be my last meeting. I just wish to share words of advice with you." And by, I believe it was Wednesday, she was removed as the leader of the opposition by 5 of her male colleagues. Now, that kind of sparked some thinking and some thought on my part. And the idea to look at the whole issue of female youth leaders transitioning to elective politics came after being coerced by what we call two of my mentors at the time to do the summer program at the Institute of Gender and Development at the University of West Indies, Cape Hill. And out of that came this paper. Now, it's shortened, it's condensed, but I'll share some of the findings with you. So the objective is to investigate the perceptions of female youth leaders on contemporary Barbadian politics, to identify the barriers / challenges to young females aiming to transition to elective politics, and to propose solutions and strategies to overcoming the barriers of involvement in representative politics. So, in terms of the methodology and theoretical perspective used, I use a combination of liberal, radical, and social feminist theories. Now, if at any time I misrepresent the theories, please forgive me. I know Amilcar is at the end, he's the expert. However, I will take any correction. Feminist research is action-oriented and seeks to bring personal as well as societal change through its findings, and it uses a qualitative approach because your qualitative approach obviously looks at more, it looks to give more in-depth information and to get the interviewees and so on to speak more about their experiences. A sample of the literature review, we have Elsa Leo Rennie, and she speaks about inequalities which the Caribbean has inherited and that they're reflected in the leadership of the state. And the leadership of the state, as she says, is based on patriarchy and masculinity, where domination, isolation, and competition are valued over cooperation and mutual understanding. Then you have Professor Eugene Barreto, and she notes that females who possess political power are often resented due to the fact that they're traditionally the objects of power and not the decision makers. Then we have Patricia Ellis, and this is 1985, the year of the Children's War. And she says that women's reluctance to become involved in politics is based on society's view that women belong in the home and so should remain there, while the public sphere belongs to the men. I'll skip the theoretical overview, and essentially what I did for this research was to reflect on my own position as the youth council leader at the time, and how as a young man I was sitting in a position of privilege, how my actions were impacting on the young females who were in the organization, as well as to begin thinking critically about what they had to go through, and not taking for granted that because they were young and they were outspoken that they had an easy path in terms of leadership at the community, at the national level, or even if they were thinking about getting involved in elective politics. And basically all the findings, all the points presented came from interviews with several young females. Women make up the majority of the population, yet they're underrepresented in the parliamentary system. So for example, in Barbados, at the moment, we have 30 elected representatives, and you only have about, I believe it's 4 or 5 who are female, yet the majority of the population is female. Traditionally, females have not been socialized to engage in politics. It is seen as dirty, a blood sport, and unbecoming of a decent female. Women should remain in the domestic sphere and play a supportive role to their husbands. So in other words, the men can go out and do the politicking, and the women are to raise the children and give that moral support. Men have less social barriers to overcome as their private lives are not closely scrutinized like females. So Caribbean politicians, the men could have how many ever women they want, they could do all their dirtiness and worthlessness, let a female politician do it, and you know there's no end to that story. Many young females are interested in elective politics. However, young men are groomed for leadership positions. This therefore serves as a deterrent to aspiring females as they recognize that they are not the preferred choice. And this was actually a very enlightening point made by a young female who was part of a political party who was seen as the heir to the farm of that party. But she was actually pushed aside by the hierarchy of the party, and a young man push or groom for leadership, even though he had no experience. He was not in touch with the needs of the young people in the party and so on. And subsequently she became the vice president and simply played a supportive role while he went on to become a senator. Females have to work hard in order to prove that they are just as confident as their male counterparts. They do significant groundwork and are responsible for much of the campaigning and laying the foundation for males within the party to launch successful campaigns. So who does all the work on the street, right? Who does raising the finances and so on? Who's there to clean up, to organize the women? But when it comes to nomination time, who the person is nominated? Male political candidates receive a warmer reception. They are looked at as demigods, while female politicians are treated with less warmth. They're often criticized and rumored to be lesbian, especially if they do not enter politics with their family. Females are often seen as sexual objects by some male constituents and not given the level of respect they deserve. So you get a beautiful female representative to be, and the first thing that the men are interested in, she look good. They're not interested in what she knows, they're not interested in what level of representation she could bring, they're interested in her body. Younger males have accepted that females are equally gifted and just as competent. So in other words, there's been a shift at least I believe so among my generation. However, the problem lies with older males who are steadfast in their patriarchal beliefs and who are unwelcoming of females. Class also matters. Women who get involved in politics are often from the middle class families with a history of political representation. Seldom do you see working class women get the opportunity to be elevated to the national level. You get men who've been at the grassroots. They are sometimes able to make it to a higher level, but how many females involved in politics can you say actually were considered grassroots leaders? Some solutions: a change in socialization. There needs to be a shift in the way girls are socialized. Instead of telling young outspoken women that they're bitchy and bossy, there needs to be more support in harnessing their leadership. Women within political organizations need to become organized around the issue of gender inequality. Most political organizations have women's leagues. These leagues should be meeting across the political divide to discuss issues such as inequality and to advance the cause of women. So because you are JLP and somebody else is PNP, both of you have women's leagues, or we don't meet with them, but you're being marginalized. Let me not. Because you're BLP and BLP, this is both have women's leagues, both have issues of marginalization, but the women are blinded by the same patriarchy. They're loyal to their political leaders, they're loyal to their party, to their parties, and they don't realize that, hey, we're not advancing as we should. Instead of coming together and meeting, they fight the battles for the men in the parties. Women's organizations need to mentor and encourage younger females to become involved in politics. Male politicians who are progressive also need to do the same. There needs to be grassroots mobilization of women, because political activity begins within the community, and that is one of the things I remember me and Marty saying to the young people. Somebody, that's how you get involved in politics. She says, start from the grassroots. Start in the community, people will recognize you. So we need to have those young women in the community, their leadership recognized, and we need to have them that harness and have those persons promoted. A mental shift. Young females must also be willing, for the time being, to accept that they have more to prove than their male counterparts. I might get some links for this, but I see it and I preach it because I think it is a practical step. I'm a pragmatist. They must not be afraid to mobilize support for their leadership, to make personal sacrifices, and to reach out to like-minded people if they want to make that step up to the national level. Women need to be proactive in infiltrating and taking action against issues and institutions which present barriers to their political advancement. They are proactive. In the same way which persons infiltrate organizations for their own benefit, why not infiltrate political organizations? Why not push the agenda? Why not advance more women in the political sphere? Conclusion: young female leaders do not find the political system totally undemocratic and exclusive. However, traditional patriarchal behavior, the privileging of young males over young females, greater demands placed on young females to prove themselves, present several barriers to their fulfillment. However, I believe there's hope, and I have, and I will continue to do my bit in pushing as many young female leaders as I can to elective politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason, and I'm pretty sure there are a number of audience members who can deeply appreciate this being expounded on by a male. So, moving on to our next presenter, Nickson Barry. Currently is a Youth Development Officer with the Ministry of Youth and Sports in Grenada, pursuing a bachelor's degree in Youth Development work at the University of the West Indies. I think we have that in common. He has over 5 years of experience in youth work at national, regional, and international levels. Please welcome Nickson as he comes forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, so the title of the presentation is called Youth in Leadership and Politics, and there's a question here. It's asking, is it a handout coupon? Quite has been said from across the region as it relates to youth development. Of course, we can borrow the words from the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, which says that young people are not just the future, but they are the present. However, we have to ask the question as to whether the environment for youth development and youth involvement in politics is really being set. And are young people taken seriously for the efforts that they put forward? There are a lot of calls for youth participation in the SDGs and other international processes. But then you also want to wonder that, are these opportunities rationed? And are Caribbean young people really involved in the creating of a destiny of which they want? So, drawing from the theoretical background of the positive youth development approach and the evidence and strengths-based approaches, I decided, let us take a look into what really is happening within our region. So let us examine some of the facts as to what we really do have. Over 60% of the region's population, of course, we can say that it's under the age of 30. Less than 10%, however, are in our parliaments. And you can do the survey that we have done, and we have recognized that you can check the youth representation in our parliaments on one hand. So the question is, are we living up to the expectation with 60% of the population being youth, but less than 10% being in the parliament? Are we talking, do we have real representation taking place? Broken national youth councils, and I use the example here of my home country. We haven't had a national youth council since 2008. That's around the time that we had a change in government. Is there a trend that is being set here in terms of youth involvement in the political process? Moving on, across the region, no special interest seats. And mind you, I've done my research, and I've tried to find one just to prove myself wrong, but I couldn't. There are young people of youth age sitting in the Senate and probably in the House, but are there any special interest seats? And I often take from the backdrop that the Labour people, they have fought, and they have fought well, and they have been included in the Senate because we have a representative for workers in the Senate in Grenada, and I'm quite sure in Trinidad. We have the business community having the same in Grenada. We also have agriculture. The farmers, they have their representative in the Senate. But young people are calling and they're advocating for representation. Why can't they have their own special interest seat in the Senate to give them the representation that they deserve? Of course, the process has to be democratic, and I often suggest that a youth election be held and allow the national youth councils to do their jobs and get that person to sit in the parliament. Highly political selection processes for youth representation and committees result in the same youth on the political platform being chosen to represent the country in different committees or different activities. Less than 10% of the people on special state boards fall in the age of youth. Governments come, governments change, and boards are usually restructured, but you look and you wonder, where are the young people involved? So then again we ask, 10% 60% sorry, are the population. However, 10%, less than 10% sorry, are on the boards. Marquee parliaments across the region. We know that Suriname has a strong one going. However, how far the recommendations from these parliaments go? CARICOM is the ambassador program. It seems to be set up just for meetings. And we've heard some of the discussion earlier on today. Yes. And it relates to that. Trouble. Dysfunctional and outdated youth policies. While countries are looking to develop their policy and make it relevant, some are just sitting by, and the youth policy becomes another book in the library. So I really want to ask the question again. Do we really have meaningful youth engagement in politics in the region? Or is it a tokenistic approach? Is it a handled coupon that you are handed, but you really don't see the value of it? Because you get it, but is it really there? Is it a reflection of what the real thing is supposed to be? Or is it really meaningful participation? So the coupon, a tokenistic approach. Of course, youth are offered opportunities to get involved in various programs on various levels. Are these opportunities real, or are they just handouts that are rationed? Because mind you, everybody don't get it. It's rationed. It's like a storm came, and we have to point out the specific people who has to get it. So usually what you find, those in the inner political circle would receive the coupon. Gaining access to the coupon, what happens? They're handed the coupon with the expectation of conformity through organizational or political lines. So, I give you the coupon, but you have to do what I say. You are not allowed to think on your own and work to develop the youth sector. Of course, too often, tokenism kills the real impact that the youth want to make. Because you want to do something, but you have to conform with what you are offered. What is needed, however, is fair, equitable and transparent processes of selection based on merit and ability. Some people just can't do it, and they're not willing to learn how to do it, but yet you hand them the coupon, you hand them that tool. Open calls for involvement. Why can't we have open calls? Young people prove themselves to send something in. Let's interview them before we decide, okay, you are qualified, or we think you can make a good impact. Why does it always have to be the inner political circle taking charge? Using the coupon, they're handed it, what do they do with it? But of course, we have to take the backdrop that sometimes youth are often guilty of giving the opportunities presented to them and they don't use it. For example, some young people are appointed ambassadors and they forget the real reason for the appointment. And yesterday we heard the Minister of Youth made a statement that some persons, they go to conferences and they return and you ask them to present a report, and what they can tell you about is their limousine or probably the sites they visited. But where is the substance of what you really discussed? How can it benefit the young people that you were chosen to represent? These are the questions that we are asking here. We also said that youth must be ready to make themselves available to serve with passion, not just academically, but otherwise. And I'm a firm believer of servant leadership. If you are going to be leading, you must learn to serve, and you must be in the process. You cannot just lead by walking in front and telling people, come, let's go. You understand? So they must be ready and they must avail themselves. So don't be ready and hide. Be ready and come forward. What is good about the coupon? Because the coupon is not all negative, you know. Despite it could be a reflection and it's not the real thing, it's not always negative. Right? The coupon is offered and it's available. Now, to those who receive it, they must make the best of it. And I like this next point. Once inside, there is a responsibility to work to break down the iron door to create opportunities for others. I just love this quote from Marie that says, if you want to rebel from inside the system. That's much more powerful than rebelling outside the system. People stay outside and they bang the door with all kind of negative comments. They have nothing positive to say, but they want to get in the door. How can they get in the door like this? You have to be ready. You have to accept the coupon, but be ready to accept the coupon. Enter the system. and then change it from within. We need persons that will work within the system. Which coupons do you accept? You cannot take everything that comes to you. You have to be critical in your selections. All coupons are not suitable to everyone. Some people lack the capacity and the potential of certain opportunities, to activate, certain opportunities. For example, I said, when I was chatting with my friend earlier, and I said, if you cannot will the soul in the stone, why take it out? You have to be able to will it. You have to be able to activate it, if you know you can't. Let's pass it on to someone else, because you see, this is a work in progress, and if we focus in on development, we have to try to make the best of the little that we have. Youth must understand which coupon to accept, of course, and they must be honest about it. Acceptance can also be on the basis of the ability to develop quickly and make a positive impact. You're number 5, we request a number 6. Hey, if you know you can develop, if you know you are willing to learn, it can be accepted. What kind of coupon should be issued? Coupons issued should carry equal weight as those issued to other members of the organization. We tend to have some ex officio young people sitting on boards. They don't have a vote, they don't have a voice, they just sit there to say, oh, youth is involved. Example, of course, you don't have an equal voice. Opportunities that are not tokenistic, opportunities that will build not just the individual but the youth populace, of course, which are selected to represent. Coupons of relevance, it must be relevant. What can we do to help? As my fellow gentleman said, there is hope. Amen? Remove the elite outlook of the elite outlook system of the inclusion of youth involvement in politics. It's not only for the elite. Everyone can be involved, but everyone have capacity. One person that my mentor said to me, all youth have capacity and all youth can develop. So we have to remove that outlook that it's only for the elite. There must be diverse levels of entries of participation. It is not a one-way street, people. Diversity lives in our back door. I find it's in our bedroom these days. So we must have diverse levels of entry. Removal of the censor on youth voice. You know, you watch TV and they censor certain things that children can listen. Sometimes I believe youth voices are being censored. Don't say that one, because we don't want it. Youth must be free to represent. Research and evidence-based decisions. And this is something that burdens my heart when I look at the Caribbean, because we don't have much research happening. We have youth programs jumping up from all over the place. And you wonder, what is the theoretical background? What is the evidence-based research that was done to really say that this program is needed or this program will work? How are we going through that process? Train youth workers and the establishment of active youth workers associations across the region. There is a call for that. So the competency base of some of the youth workers, and I can count that the level is down. We need trained youth workers to develop our youth sector. Consolidation of the region's youth task force to develop a platform for best practice and resource sharing. We are one region. Let us stop the separation, let us stop the division, but let us share. Sometimes you want to have a workshop, you want to have a training, we prefer to go internationally. I am quite certain that there are people right within us, and I see my good friend Hendrickson sitting there. People who have the capacity to really contribute towards youth development in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, if we are going to set a platform for young people to really be involved meaningfully in the leadership and political processes of the region, we must start somewhere. We must first create the environment for such. We cannot just continue to say that young people are not interested. As youth workers, well, I'm a youth worker, as youth workers, we must facilitate the process. And this facilitation sometimes calls for us to look at the system that we are working with and make some changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. very much, Nickson. And our final presenter for the session is Amilcar Sanatan. Is a Master's of Philosophy candidate, research and teaching assistant at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. His thesis focuses on the political economy of carnival through the field of all-inclusive fetes in Trinidad. Please welcome Amilcar.
Good afternoon, everyone. To begin with, what I would like to establish for this presentation is to look at the experiences young people have, not just with conformity or rebellion, but what we call negotiations in the social sciences. And in that, we look at that buzzword of empowerment, the meaning of it, how it has been mainstreamed. And I will emphasize on its origins, but that came from radical social movements in the 60s and 70s and has been co-opted in corporate America. It has been co-opted in our political discourse and has been used as a buzzword for development and in our manifestos. So, empowerment can be defined as a process, an outcome of a process that fundamentally transforms the power relations between and among individuals and social groupings. Through in-depth interviews with youth political representatives and activists, this paper highlights the ways in which political parties have utilized development language of empowerment in the structure of political parties that simultaneously include and preclude youth from engaging in practices of political power. More specifically, the aim of the discussion is to disrupt the notion of youth empowerment in party politics by examining the lived experiences of youth in the party structure. The tightrope walk is a metaphor for the negotiations these representatives and activists make in order to survive within the party. These issues are connected to the contemporary debates on empowerment as representation, empowerment as political participation, and empowerment as decision making. So it's an exploratory paper, and what I do is I had 8 interviews with 8 youth political representatives. The findings included in this presentation is based on data gathered from just after the general election on September the 7th. Of the 8 interviews I conducted, the participants came from 5 parties in Trinidad and Tobago. Of the 2, the People's National Movement and United National Congress, but included the Congress of the People, the Independent Liberal Party, and the Alliance of Independents. In this paper, I do not engage in non-party political youth organizations such as student governments or youth NGOs. Neither do I engage in youth politicians or activists from Tobago for 2 reasons: time and resource constraints, and second, in Tobago, the political and social landscape is distinct from Trinidad. Of all the major parties nationally, the PNM is the sole party with a major party structure in both islands. In 2010, the Tobago Organization of People established itself as a second force in the Tobago political arena. They have had a history of second forces to compete with the PNM. Finally, each party emerged from different historical moments in response to differing social and political phenomena. Similarly, youth wings, which are enshrined in party constitutions, have varying roots and structures. This report does not assess the organization of youth wings and power relationships with the wider party structure. Instead, it evaluated the experiences of empowerment and disempowerment that some of the members feel. So these are the themes that I discussed. It was like 1 million questions. It's 2 hours of recording. So I lost a lot of my life talking to young politicians. But beyond that, it was very important and insightful. So to narrow it down for the purpose of this presentation and the economy of time, I might look at 2 trends under one theme. A normal question would be, like what my good friend Barry asked. Well, I asked the question, do you think you're not a coupon and the cheerleader of a political party? And they had their own views and response to that. Not just as a young person watching the party. You all understand? I would ask him, why it is you join politics, right? What is your background? What school you attended? What experience of leadership you had early on, and so on. And that is the ordinary questions, long conversations, but a way that we could get rich data. On the first issue, the first thing we look at is the political background. When asked, how do they identify themselves? One could identify oneself by place. I am an Indian from Charleville in Trinidad. I am in Grenada, I am Afro-Christian, Caribbean Christian from Guam, right? You could define yourself with certain markers of identity, and the next question I would ask is, well, what parts of those identities inform your politics? Most of the respondents stated that they were young and professional, and I'm going to look at those two words there, and not the other identities. When probed further, the awareness of being a youth was understood in relation to the obstacles they face in the professional environment and not a lack of experience. So the way that they constitute youth, being a young professional, is that we are young professionals in terms of we not reach the game, right? Not that. It's not about lacking the experience, but they see them as young in relation to the seniors to whom they have to answer to. In addition, professional explain their status of employment, which is also non-manual or blue-collar work. It rejects the idea that young politicians do not know how to run the business of government and their affairs. Professionalism, we have to also understand, as a performance, and it has gendered variance. Men wear suits. Young persons know they have to actively put money into attire to perform a professional identity. So they're talking about making things professional and has nothing to do with the business or Robert's Rules of Orders. It is a performance of youth professionalism in their affairs, which is a signifier of adulthood and professionalism. Likewise for women, I always say that if women spend less money on makeup, they'll own more land, right? A lot of the girls have to perform a hyper-femininity to use their beauty as also a signifier of respect in the professional field. The type of shoes they buy, the type of clothes they wear, their sensibilities. So the idea of professionalism is a very packed term, and it's very interesting how many young persons involved with politics identify that. When did you become interested in politics? Many of the respondents identified getting involved in leadership at the secondary school level as class prefects, house captaincy, school organizations such as UNESCO or inter-school competitions, for example, the RETT Young Leaders, which is a debating competition we have in Trinidad and Tobago. All of the respondents but one attended a prestige school, which is a top secondary school, top performance school traditionally, in Trinidad, which has a long track record of public service and extracurricular activities that promote cultural and civic participation. Secondly, most respondents stated a desire to be involved in politics by 5th and 6th forms. So the desire to participate in politics is not an 18, 21-year-old vision. It could actually be nurtured within the school time. So what about CXC, the way that we could start to frame political consciousness, I think is at a much earlier age. That is what it could do for us who want to think creatively about it. I found this very insightful. Not only is it that they approach the voting age by 5th or 6th form, but they thought that they were old enough for politics. 3 of the respondents used that exact phrase, that they were old enough. I found this very insightful because it suggested a necessary political maturity one must have when becoming involved in the process. One respondent stated that he began to read newspapers, follow manifestos, and did his Caribbean Studies internal assessment on a national policy. What this suggests is that there is a personal understanding of young persons on the requirements of politics and the political education and processes that one must informally train oneself for. Is that clear? What we can draw from these insights is that involvement from as early as the secondary school level in leadership activities motivates and creates forums for positive affirmation and creates forums for intellectual and public abilities. Second, young persons on their own analysis develop a sense of requirements for leadership and initiative and initiate that process. The next theme, youth empowerment and political parties. What are the major issues facing young people today? The number one issue they saw was underemployment or unemployment, but not a very clear definition or distinction of the two. Most of the respondents held the view that underemployment or unemployment was a major issue facing the youth population nationally. Interestingly, many of them posited that the inflexibility of the current economy and its privileging of oil, gas, energy and construction sectors, they all urged for a diversity of the economy that harness the skill sets and creative expressions of young people like themselves. How did the Youth Party address these issues of the lack of diversity in the economy or underemployment and so on? All of the youth groups who were not in political power suggested that much could not be done about addressing these issues since they were not part of the ruling regime. This is a feature of youth groups where they perceive state power is the ultimate decision maker, and it is not uncommon, especially when among them they did not have backgrounds outside of party politics. So many of them weren't involved with social and cultural mobilizations and activities. They went directly to the state and they saw political problems as the ultimate or the privileged form of making interventions into national matters. Furthermore, a reward of being in party politics was having the ear of the minister or the member of parliament and not necessarily having the power to caucus opinion in the youth and inform decisions at the national executive level of the party. Many of them aspired to be close to power, knowing that they couldn't possess it itself. It wasn't that they had a youth wing that they turned to the youth to mobilize opinion and challenge the broader party structure. Team 3, youth involvement in party politics. What are some benefits you receive from participating in a youth arm? First, all participants appreciated networking across a wide cross-section of the nation. As young entrepreneurs and young professionals, the party base provides them with a base upon which they can expand business networks. Moreover, most of the participants saw the youth arm as a family. Many of them were involved in volunteering, mentoring, and provided professional and personal support for members of the youth arm. What are some of the losses, which is more important to me? All participants cited the burden of using personal finances to fund initiatives of the youth arm. They often cited a lack of financial autonomy of the youth arm and lengthy processes of disbursement of funds. In addition, they felt as if the party put their personal well-being secondary to the business of the party. This, of course, discourages them. This reality highlights the uneasy position young politicians, activists have as a respondent put, "I am a full-time student, full-time mother, and a full-time politician." Gendered variances between young women and men must be taken into account, but the near impossibility of professional work life and political work and life balance is a push factor to youth participation in politics. If you all are interested, I would like to discuss further youth responses to the idea of tribal politics, and we'll also look further at youth negotiations in the party structure and what are some of the obstacles they face. But in the interest of time, I would like to just close here. No, I'm not closing there. I'm not done, sorry. So to wrap up here, I'm in the process of closing here, right? In my 3 minutes. Somebody interested when you find out what are the major obstacles. If you think it's a mature or senior politician telling you, no, you can't get here or we disrespect you, no. What were the major issues that the young people felt as the obstacles in it? The party respect and the idea of seniority and experience was debilitating to them. Secondly, the public relations officer was the biggest oppressor involved with the party, right? When they wanted the chance to communicate to the public on an issue, as one said, while it was hot in my hands, it sometimes takes a week for approval. Almost all of them complain about the PRO, right, the public relations officer. They want to hear us speak. When they do, they turn off. So in terms of the visibility that they had within the party structure was very minimalist, and they wanted to challenge that. In fact, it seemed as if many had the fear of being ghettoized in the party structure as a youth arm. Some of them preferred that they were just members of the party itself. What happens as you register for the party and you fall under 30, you become an automatic member of the youth arm. And that is why many of them might not espouse a youth consciousness as committed to that different entity, right? And trying to challenge the party to promote their vision at the national executive level, which is the de facto parliament, for those who don't know, right? That is where decisions around money is made in the country, the national executive level. So some of them even had some fears about being identified as a youth in that process. Defining empowerment is very important. I asked them to define it in their own words, and we had this up here. This is just more descriptive to see how many persons feel about the word empowerment on their own. So in conclusion, what you want to look at, and I would like to engage for those who are interested, is how the party structure, there are differences, namely among the PNM, the UNC, and the COP. All party structures are different, but namely among the two major parties, and I would look at it as a coalition. There's a very interesting relationship that the youth chairman is usually youth officer as the party. I thought at first in the People's National Movement that they would have had an acrimonious relationship when the youth officer is an elected position which is separate from the youth chairperson from the Youth League, the National Youth League. However, they appreciate the support of his now Minister Fitzgerald Hines in the role that he helps to the youth. Strategically, if a senior politician is on your side as a youth officer who sits on the national executive, they might be able to lobby support on your behalf, right, in that problematic space. So it's not just a situation as well, you old and I young, and how they compare old man or old woman as a youth officer. more creatively, one could use that position to advance and lobby on matters more effectively, and it's very interesting to have it that way. Oftentimes, they felt as if the youth are seen as a physical resource for their physical abilities and not an intellectual one, and there are specific cases which are very interesting. That was mind-blowing to me, and I would love to share sometime, even informally after. The nature of youth involvement is that they have to fight for representation in the party, and that was a signifier of their marginal status. And last, empowerment. What they really enjoyed the most was the networking abilities, and that means we should not underscore consciousness-raising chances where they get to engage youth among different class lines. The executive of these parties are usually from the middle class and tertiary educated. They like the ability where the national party, the arm of it, because the broad coalition of the party, they were spread across, and the sense of power which came from public engagement and participation on matters. They enjoy the public speaking, they enjoy the platform participation, and they enjoy the policy writing. And that is something we should always look at including young persons in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Amilcar. We're now going to open up the floor for questions, comments. We're asking those who will be asking questions or making comments to keep it as concise as possible, so we can get as many persons. And then my friend from Haiti here after. We can take three at once, and then we'll give the panel the opportunity to respond, and then we'll probably see if we can get in some more questions after. Do we have a microphone?
Yeah. Well, my question is basically to, I would say, Nickson and Amilcar. Since I get the impression or the slight persuasion that, you know, we should try to effect change from within the system, which is not a bad idea. But what do you think about the notion of setting up a model that makes the current one a bit obsolete or shows it up? Why are young persons afraid to form their own political parties as opposed to getting involved in what exists and perpetuating the same two-party system that we are all talking about? Alright, I'll let you leave that one for now.
Okay, we're gonna, before we get your responses, we're gonna go ahead and ask your
Thank
question.
you. My name is Ali, and as Mr. say, I'm from Haiti. And I noticed that my participation at this conference make me understand that the other Caribbean, one of the reasons that the CARICOM didn't work for me is the reason that the reason why is the Commonwealth countries are far be ahead of Haiti in terms of organizations and youth participation also. And then I understand that one of the other reasons is that in Haiti, civic education we lack civic education and citizenship in classes, in primary, secondary classes. So I would like to know, you as young people who are participating in politics in your country, how can we start a learning process? What is a good practice for a good practice for civic education in primary education and secondary education and a citizenship education also? How can we educate young people for citizenship effectively?
Oh, I forgot to say, when you ask any question, please give your name.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Taryn Butcher. I'm from Belize, and I am the CARICOM Youth Ambassador. And this is more to you, Mr. Barry. And the key word, I guess, in this statement would be seems, right? I can speak from Belize, from my point, where we man a CARICOM Youth Ambassador desk that is open 5 days a week at our Department of Youth Services, where we seek to identify issues affecting youth in our country, whether it be sexual health and reproduction in the area of HIV and AIDS or teenage pregnancies, crimes that are stemmed by, young people, youth violence, whether it's youth unemployment. Regionally, I know oftentimes we come together, we can unite for causes like the Dominica Relief after the recent, the tropical storm that hit Erica. So regionally, I know we are moving. Also, in the country where I believe we share a special relationship with our Minister of Youth, where I can sit down with him and bounce off of ideas, and where we can both identify issues affecting youth and the best way to tackle these issues. Now, we may not so much write about it or document, but that just might take a little bit too much time, which I believe comes back to what makes it seem as if we are only here for meetings. Like I said, I can only speak for Belize, where we're on the road, not where we want to be yet, but I think we're on the road and we're getting there, where we're seeking to raise a platform where young people can come out and speak on issues that are affecting the country. Like a great topic on October 14th, where we're actually going to have schools debating on an issue that has taken the country by storm, where our borders are being questioned, where our territory and our sovereignty, is being questioned, and we're giving young people a place to speak on, as well as other issues, education. That way we can take it back to our Minister of Youth, who is, in the crowd with us, and we can have him listen to what young people are thinking and just the voices of the young people. So are we just here for meetings? I would say some of us aren't, most of us aren't, but something to, I think, look a little more into, that we are being active voices and active persons when it comes to politics. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments and questions. Members of the panel will give them a chance to respond to. Go ahead.
All right, thanks very much, Timothy. One of the first things that, I always have to teach introductory classes, Imagine if Bill Clinton campaigned as a Caucasian American president. I'm going to be your 46th Caucasian American president, and everybody just had a clap. And then I want to know, why is it you're a Cambodian American, or as they say, Asian American, to refer to people from Southeast, or Barack Obama understands itself as an African American? Because the dominant group is rendered invisible. There's no need to identify yourself white or Caucasian in a culture where Americanness is constituted by that. Likewise, there's no senior person's arm in a political party. There's no male arm, right, for men's needs. There's a woman's arm, right? And there's a youth arm, because it's not the body, so you have to be two arms, right? And in that way, we need to understand on the premise, right? You are marginal. Right? And that means you have to negotiate that space. It's rocky terrain from the start. What you propose in the think about the two-party system is a different conference you might have to be at to look at political science. And I have a very different perspective on government on the whole, and I don't want to bring that up here. But what we could appreciate from our two-party system in the Caribbean, an interesting feature is most of its leaders were from the progressive guard. In that night, went to school in 1960s and 70s, and were probably about 19 to 25 in that period. Or actually, all of them were here at Mona campus doing social sciences when economics was the hot thing from the 60s going on, right? PNP helped mobilize that. Michael Manny benefited from that youth movement. And it's interesting things. When Norman Govan was a young scholar, he was climbing up mountains and trying to get a people's perspective to give him a platform to speak on. So young people have been agents for change, right? Historically, anybody, Ras Gonzalez was guild president, right? Then after he was a hot tutor back then, Walter Rodney was running through the islands, right? And in that way, we need to really commend what they have done as young people and to take that same mandate for ourselves. So within the two-party structure, never underscore the value, the role that they took on in history as young persons themselves. And that is why we really should be collegial with each other, We laugh at our friends who become politicians after, because they're all radical now. And next thing they come back in this meeting, CYDC 10th anniversary, and Minister, we just welcome the Honorable Minister to Honorable Minister to it's useful to us. So meaning that young people use that. But an interesting thing, I thought about a question, and I'm going to answer you and cut. I said yesterday, youth as leaders, youth and leadership, and youth leadership. Three distinct things we should learn to appreciate. But when yesterday someone asked a very interesting question about why it is that we cling on to power and so on. It's also because the avenues are limited, right? So the avenue for power in the Caribbean is oftentimes through state bureaucratic power. For the broader society as well, they are the largest driver of the economy, and also respectability if you don't own land or a business, right? And even if you own a business, you still try to access state power because the way it's commingled here. So for young persons, they internalize that logic very well, and they have more narrow avenues to access state power, and that is why it seems very problematic, competitive, and so on. I think once we recognize the conditions for young people, we learn to appreciate that, and then we might not just think about liberal views of a quota. A quota, it have real young people that are in positions I don't like, right? Because they lack the consciousness. And if you want to look at the politics of youth leadership, we will look at a political ideology of dealing with young people. That's why I propose a youth studies and a youth perspective. And it doesn't matter what age you have, you can advocate for your interests. I don't have to be indigenous. I'm not indigenous, but I advocate, right, for their perspectives. And I like how it is they defend justice in the environment and the peoples and the dignity that they must have. Right? You could draw parallels to other struggles, even if your identity is not marked by it. Yeah.
Barry, you want to?
Yes, as it relates to Timothy's question in terms of why are youth afraid of forming their own parties, the backdrop of the paper asked the question, is the environment really set for young people to get involved in politics? I know it's quite interesting that when I look closer, I realize that there is a trend that young people sometimes don't even support their own. I went into the bank a couple months ago, and I was talking to this young man, and he was saying to me, "Oh, you know this young man." I said, "Yes, we are very good friends." He said, "He's running for office." I said, "Yes." And he said, "No, I wouldn't support him." I said, "Why?" He said, "This young man, I don't believe he can give me what I'm looking for." You understand? So we have...
And maybe he can't.
Well, maybe he can't, right? And I won't disagree with that. Maybe he just can't. But we have the tendency, and I believe that sometimes we have to examine the type of politics that we practice in the Caribbean. The politics of fair, where people really, you want to get in, but you have so much to lose as a young person that if I only step foot, I'm finished. You understand? One person was saying to me that someone told them, "Boy, you shouldn't get into politics, you should wait until you're 45.
A retirement package.
So these are the questions that we really have to ask. So, yes, it is good to form your own political party, but the question is the environment ready for a youth
party? Why form a political party? For what?
Exactly. So we have Grenada is
to get old one day and for next young person and say like form your own.
Grenada has a population of just about 110,000. I believe we have over 17 political parties registered. So why do we need another one? Hence we call for working within the system. Yes, and I appreciate my good colleague there, the Caribbean Youth Ambassador, for asking the question. Because, as I also mentioned, there is a call for a regional consolidation task force. Because mind you, and I want to be very frank about this, I have sat with Caribbean Youth Ambassadors and discussed with them, and I asked them, I said, "So, do you have a skills certificate?" And they look at me and say, "No, what is that?" I said, "Well, I have one." I did the research, I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I spoke to the people there, and I said, "You know what, I want to make my contribution towards CSME and regional integration. I would get my certificate because I want to be ready, I want to be prepared." So while you are working hard, I would advise that you share that kind of spirit and push with your fellow comrades.
We're going to take some more questions now.
Yeah. Just I am not, my comment is not in support of this new political party, like you say. Good. But it's about a comment that you made, Nickson here. You made a comment about is the environment and the environment and the things. And I think that is part of the challenge in the youth movement. I think it's very good Amilcar make a point about the involvement and the contribution, and it could go even beyond, even before then, in the 1930s in terms of people that we talk about, Grantley Adams. All of those persons face power at a young stage. The environment was not conducive. This thing about we all of a sudden looking for this conducive environment. Power, those who dominate power will not give up power. You have to fight for it. So this thing about expecting it go be cushy and you're moving into it and they go say, oh Nickson, you have been a good and faithful soldier. No, that never happened. But even in your political party that you belong, that they will handle power. People make you know, they make you know which section of the band you're in. Yeah, you have to pay for that kind of costume. So you have to decide what it is your purpose. Now if you have a conviction and it's social change and you're looking for transformation, then you will deal with power. But if what you want is that you are envious of the seemingly privileged position of those who are in the political offices now, and you say, oh God, they're taking long to give me my blind, then you're in problems. Don't get involved. Because another generation of young people will be throwing stones after you in your political meeting, just as they did now. So we have to be. Another thing that may not be politically correct to say, but what's new? Is this thing about CARICOM youth ambassadors. And I must start by saying that people like Ildiz and Heather Johnson before, they've taken the time and tried to transform a basket, Beltarian and others, tried to transform a basket into a bucket. Yeah? What the heads of government gave was a basket to go and carry water. The heads of government came up with the CSME. Alright? They took the position at that level up there, as usual. It did not have the grounding and the endorsement of the masses. And when they saw that project was failing, young people are not connected to it, not interested in it. They decided with this new brilliant idea, let us bring together this caucus called CARICOM Youth Ambassadors, and their role. If you check the thing, you'll see your first and foremost responsibility is to go and sell CSME to the young people, because they couldn't sell it because it was not all the people. And so that is what they did. So they gave the young people, the CARICOM ambassadors, a basket to carry water. And so it is just out of the goodness. People like Heather Johnson have been trying with welding torch and all kind of things, trying to block out. But a basket is holds all over, you know. So bear that in mind. CARICOM Youth Ambassadors was not about youth empowerment. It was heads of government using young people to try and build acceptance of something they developed without the people's participation.
Yeah. Can I get some here?
Hi, good evening everyone. My name is Tina. I'm an international relations major in the Department of Government, and I'm doing a minor in leadership, strategy and management. And there's something that I would like to share with the audience that I was learning in my leadership class on Monday. The leadership filtration theory, it argues that high impact leaders in the Caribbean have been forced out of the process. I hear persons, the presenters and some members of the audience giving their different notions on change and social movements and transformation, especially in the political party system. When you are a high impact leader who is going to go against the status quo and pressure the social systems and structures that are in place, you're forced out of the system. Hence the reason I don't think we have had any transformational leaders in the region. And young people, that's also one of the reasons that they are not interested in politics. There are many people who want to make a change, but observing what is happening in the political parties, this is what is causing them to move away from it, because they see that this is how the system is set, hence we can't do anything to make a difference.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would not respond on what Henry said, because I may also be politically very incorrect. But I just want to clarify something that Barry said about Suriname's youth parliamentary system. You mentioned it as being, or you referred to it as being mock, and I cannot agree with that.
No, I didn't.
So maybe you can clarify it.
No, I said we have mock parliaments across the region. However, Suriname has a very good thing going.
Okay.
Alright, we have one more comment on that side.
National consultation. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamal Dudluck from Guyana. I had a similar thought with what Timothy was saying, and I think what happens most time, where young people feel that they need another party or they need to create something different or carve out something different, is that the political parties that are there doesn't represent the ideology that was the party in the 1960s or the 70s. So they've moved away from what we thought it was, and you want something different from what is there. And for me, entering into a political party, or I see it as selling your soul sometimes, because when you put yourself into a party, you're branded with that ideology, and you might not represent the entire ideology that you want. And it's hard as a young person to say at 25 you're committing to this for the rest of your life, and you the things that are happening in there, it doesn't cut by you. So I see it as you want that own space. And for example, in my country as well, when you see the political parties, the two political parties, even though they're different, they're the same. They're cutting the same cloth. Because at the end of the day, whether they're opposition or government, when they get in there, it's a different story. And I feel as a young person, it's really hard to make that decision, enter into the system and change it from within, because you don't want to be labeled and you don't want to be boxed in.
Alright, before I'm just going to take one more comment from the Minister of Youth for Grenada, and then we're going to have the panelists make some responses. I know that Nicole wants to respond to the question that was posed from Haiti, but I'm going to let the Minister make her comment before.
I'm just going to mention two things. One to do with gender and the other one to do with youth in politics and in a general sense. The comment is that there may be variances, differences country by country, for example, in gender. I know Grenada's situation is very different based on the number of women in Parliament, for example. So there will be slight differences, and maybe I wouldn't want to comment too much on. There might be diverse situations in some other areas. And also with regards to the actual situation, I know there was a document done recently in Grenada's case as it relates to females in politics. I guess the culture and little differences may make things a little different. But the point I want to dwell on is maybe to wonder as I speak if where we are not here because we're probably trying to buy too much at one time. Okay. Meaning, maybe one of the things we need to look at, do we need to prioritize about 10 things, for example, that we want to achieve within 2 years or within 5 years? For example, ensuring that every country in the region has a national youth policy, that every country in the region has a national youth council, that these are the specific boards that we want to ensure that we have a youth represented on. So I know there was a discussion on, is it Jamaica, with the 2030 plan. Grenada is now doing a 2030 plan. So when it comes to national plan, do we want to mandate that there is youth representation? For example, the status of youth organization. What are we saying? Oh, district, well, parish might not be relevant to everybody, but what do we want? Now, if we establish what are those fundamental basic things that we want to have, I believe gradually we are going to eventually end up where we want to get. But incrementally, what is it that we want to achieve, especially at the foundation stage? So are we in the process of moving away, for example, the mock youth parliament? We took a decision. We're going to start from the bottom up all over again. So we've abandoned the mock parliament, and we have concentrated in the last year or so on re-establishing youth organization. You can't have no national youth council if you don't have functioning youth organizations in the first place. So maybe the question has to be, where we are, what is it that we want in the shortest possible space? And are we trying to pick up here when there are things down here that we need to grab, fill the bucket first, and then stretch further? And I would probably propose that in the soonest possible time that we prioritize what are the prerequisites, what are the fundamentals, what is it that we must get right before we can, because you don't have no real true representation if these people are not even engaged here. So there are some fundamentals, there are some basics, and we have to get it right from the bottom up.
Okay, thank you, Minister, for your comments.
I just want to also just state too, when you were, Madam Minister, when you were presenting this morning, I wanted to ask you if you thought that what you just stated in terms of really being different, in terms of what Maurice Bishop was trying to build before he was assassinated, because I remember watching a movie that talked about his making inroads between youth and women, and I really thought that meant that, because I was going to ask you point blank, do you think you're a product of that?
Yeah, and that is why I said every country would have little unique things about, and I think the revolution movement would have really impacted the Grenadines situation, youth and women, because some of the issues, for example, in the political party that I belong to, I can say youth have a voice. Even with regards to the issue or the subject of youth, you would hardly even have a national rally, for example, where youth does not get featured, or a young person is not included, even about other very critical issues, health and tourism, whatever. So I think the revolutionary movement may have had, and that's why I say every country has a little unique situation to them.
The revolution?
Yes, definitely.
I'm not Maurice Bishop for the revolution. Maurice Bishop was part of the revolution. He led it, but he was not Maurice. The revolution.
Charles, I'll leave that to you.
Yes, I just wanted to respond. In terms of, as I said, I had two forerunner recommendations in that when we were looking at, in terms of how the schools were operating back home, we recognize that there's now a recommendation to have student bodies within schools. It's unfortunate that in a PTA, where you come to sit down to talk about your child, the child doesn't have representation. So it's really about how we deal with the beneficiaries, and they're not even represented in terms of having a say. Also too, coming out of an incident that we had in Trinidad last year, when they interviewed a couple of women outside of Parliament and asking them why they were there. And the women really could not respond in a meaningful way.
Oh, yes,
and we had the discussion in Canada, where I was studying at the time, about where are children placed in protests. Of course, the room was divided, no, they shouldn't be there depending on the type of protest. And we said, no, there should be spaces where everybody knows that this is where the children are. Because they also are part of that process as well, because they benefit from whatever else goes on. And that is how we started the talk, and that's when I started my research about recognizing that there are children's parliament in the world. And it's interesting that in terms of how we see, and I was really, really particularly interested in the fact that they were both in Africa and Asia. I would say in some of our minds, we think of them as sometimes behind in terms of where we are. But they are going guns. So why not have a children's parliament? And I'm very specific, let the children decide what they're debating on. I don't know in other territories, but in our territory, you get the topic to be debated on. Yeah. I would think you pull the children, you give them some time to talk, and whatever the 2-3 topics, let them then debate, and let them make a decision about what they want to debate on. Because at the end of the day, there's space. If it's a playground, if it's maybe to include a subject in terms of what they want to teach, I think it should be their decision. So those are the 2 recommendations I would say for starting at a lower level in terms of representation.
Well, going back to the point of youth parliaments, and I mentioned this in my presentation as well, is that we have youth parliaments in the region, and we call them mock parliaments because that is kind of what they are. I'm speaking in general terms there, Suriname. Because they are, I'm being very careful, there are some have definite exceptions to what is going on, but we have young people who we believe have the capacity to change our region, who have the capacity to introduce legislation to address issues that are affecting young people. So why do we have youth parliaments where young people are just paraded as prospective leaders and not given the opportunity to actually bring some sort of substance to the national conversation? Why can't young people have a parliament where they introduce a piece of legislation that the MPs debate and make an act of parliament and pass and make it into law? Why are we restricting our young people to a fast of participation? We really have to remove ourselves from that.
True. I'll let you give Jason to answer his gender question, but what do you think? You see the reason I'm not a fan of this youth parliament thing? That's good for secondary school. To understand that somebody who's walking with the, what do you call that? They try to make me do that once. And I put my hand on this lottery, and I see the man who does walk with silver step. And they say, don't call it that, don't call it that. I said, I'm not going to do that here today. I come here to say something. Meaning that at a certain age, I don't understand the value of a youth parliament. If you want to play youth parliament, go outside the real parliament, sit down there with youths, go in the gallery and make noise, lobby a senator. You know many young people don't know how to write a press release yet? That's the first thing in like civic organizing 101. You learn how to write a letter to the editor or a press release. And they don't answer our press releases. That means they'll start, if you love Facebook so much, create all guerrilla media. So my thing is, when the young people want political parties, I understand that they want to feel represented in the most obvious thing of visibility that we see, and we want to match that power with it. And what we deny is the real influence that we have in other spaces. I have my own opinions about parliamentary democracy itself. We accept all the assumptions of society and then just put a youth face it and then we think it's good. But let's start to think about that. In most of the Caribbean islands, for those who only second, I went to the Cheddy Jagan house and I saw that picture of Cheddy walking out there with folks as friends in the whole and thing up, and that is the Prime Minister and the Premier and Deputy Premier at the time. And one moment in history changed the entire course of 50 years for one country. Like I look at that now, like there's two friends, best of interest, right? One moment in history changed the course of a country for 50 years, right? And what does that mean? Is that conversation that we could have here to make decisions about our future, and that means it is really Dr. Gilbert Roberts said ideational innovation, right? You need to have that idea. The Caribbean has never had a second force since our first independence movement, right? We've had variants of that first one, right? In Trinidad, we have an ethno-religious response to what was happening from independence. Our independence liberators, they take two labor parties and they center right on the social conservatism, but also center left because they have to give to us the poor people living in the country, right? But we don't have ideological differences, so young people can't fit the spectrum of their interests. And young people not in the majority on the progressive front. Right? And as somebody involved with these little movements, right? Young people not lining up for that. Most young people mobilize around the major parties. Right? Happily so. Right? Happily so. And we need to learn to also respect their conditions for being in it. If it is you think you're a minority voice, well, we need to do a lot of work to get the majority win. I need to make people like my radicalism, right? Because nobody's like it. So only fluff talk about young people different. Most young people not different. But on the real young people on a daily basis, right? Right? There's young people on Facebook who messaging me to tell me don't be protesting, right? About them a 400 likes for a nice little activist picture or whatever. So I know that you're only friends, but don't take young people as any progressive front in anything. Right? That is the struggle for progressive people in a progressive world.
But so you asked a question concerning civics and citizenship participation. Go ahead.
Yeah, to the brother from Haiti, I realize my fellow panelists got your question. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. As a teacher and as somebody who involved in youth movement, I think the formal education plays an important part. In other words, you have to lobby, I believe, if it is not on the curriculum somewhere, you have to lobby for it to be on the curriculum, whether it's civics, whether it be some sort of national education, some sort of historical something, because then at that level you get a broad, you have a broad reach in terms of teaching young people about the history, teaching them about the different processes, government, governance, constitution, and so on. I would say you also have to, culture plays a big part of it. The media plays a big part in it. In other words, you have programs which, again, teach young people about the different institutions in society. The NGO sector also has to play a big part. In other words, there are groups out there which are going to teach young people. And one of the things they mentioned was the whole idea of non-formal education. And that is something that became very interesting to me, having gone and interacted with the European Youth Forum, and they were big on that. The whole idea of participation, the whole idea of empowerment and so on. And so you need groups to be able to push that, to set up to teach young people, and then to grow other young people who can pass on that information. Then to the other point which Timothy raised, from a personal perspective, I've been involved in the political party, in the informal political party. And like the gentleman from Guyana said, I was there and I was wondering, what have I gotten myself involved in? Right? And some people would know Errol Barrow. I joined that party because I read the speeches of Errol Barrow from cover to cover, from front to back, and realized that what he was advocating at the time, the party had grown, I'd done a 360 on that. And then for the young people in the party, it was like, if you say jump, they ask you, if the politicians say jump, they ask how high. And I always maintain a youth forum of a political party should never be there to rubber stamp. It has to be there to question, it has to be there to interrogate policy, etc., etc. So what I did eventually, I think she met, the young lady mentioned something about being forced out. Eventually I was, quote unquote, before I left, I said, you know what, I'm not going to use this space to make my mark. I'm here today, right? I'm here today because I realize there are other spaces, there are other young people who may not be involved, but who I can join with to make my mark. And sometimes that is what you have to do. You have to put pressure from the outside and apply so much heat that that thing takes shape from outside. And I find now that more and more persons are becoming, in Barbados, persons are becoming less interested in the political party, but what they want to see, they're forming citizen organizations and they're putting significant pressure on government, because we don't realize how much power we have when we come together. All right? And when you pull the rug from under the political parties, when you make them realize that you can hold them accountable, that is when they shift, because you put them there. So you don't always need to be inside to get what you want done. Even though I still advocate being on the inside to transform things. All right. So to Timothy's point, I guess it depends on the situation. It depends on if the conditions are right for a third party. Because honestly, you need money. You need money. You need brains. You need backing. And if you don't have those things, we have one political party called People's Empowerment Party, and they've been there, they've been a pressure group for years, but they can't get 100 votes in any election. All right, but still, you join up with those people and you put enough pressure on the government to get things changed.
Okay. Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions or comments because of the time, and we have to get quickly a coffee break and then back for our next session. So thank you very much for attending this session, and thank you to our panelists for their